you want to grab a chumash, we're on page 693. We're beginning Parashat Kedoshim, and we're sort of in the midst of a transition moment in the book of Leviticus. Up till now, we've been concerned with a lot of rules of priestly conduct. We've been concerned with how the temple or the tabernacle is going to function. And we've been concerned with how the priests are going to do their job, when they're going to do it, how they are going to be qualified or maybe not qualified. And then towards the end of this last week's Parsha, Achrei Mot, we begin sort of a transition into more general rules for society. Rules not for the Kohanim, but for everyone who is living in biblical Israel. Here, can I put you down? What do you think? Can I put you down? Huggy. Yeah, here we go. Here, I'm going to put you down, okay? Yeah. Where's Daddy Deepa?
It's over there.
Thank you. Thank you. And so this transition really becomes quite clear in this week's Torah portion, Kedoshim, which begins, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the whole Israelite community, just in case we weren't sure, and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. So this is the first sort of piece of general information that we receive in this chapter, and it's a big one. And in many ways, this is a summary not only of the chapter, not only of Leviticus, but really the whole Torah. The whole Torah, if you were to try to summarize it, it is about our people's history, and it is about a number of ritual actions, and it is about codes of ethics and codes of national law. But at its heart, it is about holiness. It is about the holiness that comes with distinction, with separation, the holiness that comes with a very intimate contact with the creator of the universe. And that's the charge here. The charge, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. It's not a separate mitzvah. It's not a commandment. It's sort of the structure, the superstructure around which all of the commandments and all of Jewish life are built. That we have this sense that beyond even goodness, beyond even righteousness, which are obviously important, there's a sense of holiness. There's a sense that we are bound and obligated to do things to preserve our holiness, to preserve our distinction. It's not to dismiss any other category of righteousness or goodness or proper behavior or anything like that, but holiness stands as its own virtue, as its own merit. And we receive no instruction here about how to do that. It doesn't say, here's how you're going to be holy. But presumably what follows this verse is the set of instructions for how we are going to build a society that is holy, how we are going to be as holy as God is, or at least we're going to approach that level of holiness, which if you try to engage with this in a serious way, it becomes very difficult. How on earth can you say God is this, therefore I should be that? Because God is so different than us. God is so distinct from us. It's in many ways an impossible charge to be as holy as God. And yet here it is. Here we are commanded. Here we are ordered. You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Any thoughts about that? Questions, comments, concerns?
The assumption that we should be as holy, we have a part of God in ourselves.
Sure.
It's a question of accessing the godliness we have within that gets kind of cluttered and obscured.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Yes. I mean, that is certainly in the way we have we have understood the biblical message, the Torah's message. We take it as a sort of general principle when in the book of Genesis it says that we were created in the image of God, B'Tselem Elohim. I mean, there is another way to read that, which is to say, Adam and Eve, they were B'Tselem Elohim, and we've sort of degraded since then. But that's not how the rabbis read the text. That's never how they look at it. For them, every human being is B'Tselem Elohim. And because every human being is in the image of God and has the spark of the divine, the God breathed life into us at the very beginning, that we have this connection to God and we have this potential. We have this very intense potential for holiness that perhaps other creatures don't have. So, all right, we'll turn the page. 694, verse 3. You shall each revere his mother and his father and keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. So now we are entering what sort of looks like a legal code, and presumably this is our quest for holiness. This is what we're striving for, is to be as holy as God is, and here's how you're going to do it. You shall each revere his mother and his father and keep my Sabbaths. That's not all of it, obviously, but that's the first one that's mentioned. And there's a lot to unpack in just that one verse. The rabbis point out, first of all, that in the Ten Commandments we're told to honor our father and our mother, and here we're told to revere our mother and our father, and so the order is reversed. Some people point to a distinction between honoring and revering, where one might be more patriarchal and the other more matriarchal or something like that. Others say that this serves to sort of balance out the verse in the Ten Commandments, so that one of them had to be mentioned first, and so you have the two verses, and in each verse a different one is mentioned first, and that just balances them. So father and mother become equal in the synthesis of the two verses. There's another thing that the rabbis point to here, which is that the connection between these two completely distinct concepts of revering your mother and father on the one hand and keeping Shabbat on the other hand, might be that we revere our mother and father, but if they instruct us not to keep Shabbat, we ignore it. So reverence for parents does not include disobeying the Torah or breaking any of God's commandments. They're considered one sort of outranks the other, and this is for many people this is a challenge for many people. I know I have a lot of when I was in rabbinical school, I had a lot of friends, a lot of colleagues. Now they're colleagues, and it was very hard to go home that first Passover, and maybe mom and dad don't keep the kitchen as strict as the rabbis have been teaching us we ought to. And what do you do with that? And it's a challenge. Our Rabbi Elliot Dorff told us that in those sort of situations, you ask one question, which is this kosher? And if the answer you receive is yes, that's all you need. You don't start asking about, oh, did you scrub it for this many minutes? Was the water boiling at this temperature? Just, yes, it's kosher. That's all you need. That's all you need to hear. And that's how you strike this balance. Please, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
What is the verb that's used? I don't think it's kira, but it's a different.
Kabed. Kabed?
Okay.
Like kavod. Yeah. So literally it means, like to make weighty, to make heavy. So you make heavy your mother or your father and your mother. And there's a lot going on there. There's a lot going on there. The verb is in a lot of uses, it's the opposite of the verb, the word hevel, which is like a puff of air, like a little puff of the wind, which is the name of Adam and Eve's son Abel, is hevel. And so is God making a reference to the Cain and Abel story there? Hard to say, but he does then say, I am a jealous God, El Kana. So there's a reference to Cain and a reference to Abel in the same section. So it's hard to say where that's going exactly, but it's to me it's fascinating. So I'll point out one more thing about these two verses, verse 2 and verse 3. So we're told, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy, making it pretty clear that we are supposed to be engaging in acts that are akin to God. And this is how the rabbis understand this, that you can see, for instance, God visits the sick when after Abraham's circumcision, when he comes to visit and announces the coming birth of Isaac. And so just as God visits the sick, we should feed the sick. Just as God visits the sick, we should visit the sick. Just as God feeds the hungry with the manna from heaven, we should feed the hungry. And yet, this first commandment we're told in verse 3, revere your father, or revere your mother and your father. God can't do that. God doesn't have a mother. God doesn't have a father. This is a moment immediately where the metaphor breaks down. The metaphor just simply can't work here. So I'm not going to offer you any like concluding thoughts on why that is, but there's a tension to live with here, which is interesting to me. All right, we'll turn now to verse. We'll keep going. Yeah, we'll keep going. We'll look at verse 4. So do not turn to idols or make molten gods for yourselves. I, the Lord, am your God. So we're seeing, and we saw this in last week's Parashat too, that we sort of end sections by saying, I am the Lord your God, or I, the Lord, am your God, however you want to translate that. And in now we've had sections that are very small. Verse 3 was a one-verse section. Verse 4 is a one-verse section. Do not turn to idols or make molten gods for yourselves. End of section. I am the Lord your God. And so clearly this stands on its own, or it's supposed to stand on its own. The verb here for molten is masecha, and it says lo tifnu el ha'elilim velohe masecha. So literally, don't make for yourself. Elilim is very hard to translate. Fake gods is probably the best way to put it, or non-gods. We see this in on Kabbalat Shabbat, Psalm 96, where we say that God is greater than all of the gods, and then the very next verse, just in case you thought that meant there are lots of gods, we say Kol Elohei Ha'amim Elilim, that all of the gods of the nations are Elilim. And to explain what that is, the Rashi turns to a verse from Job that uses this word, and here we see this word as well, that we shouldn't make Elilim and Elohei Masecha, literally gods of molten metal, we shouldn't make. And this is something my one-time teacher Richard Elliott Friedman points to, the distinction between molten metal and how do you call it, gold leaf, when you put a little metal on like a piece of wood or something, that appears to be a distinction that the author of Leviticus is especially concerned with, because golden calf bad, cherubim in the Ark of the Covenant good. And so you want to make sure that you're specifying don't make an idol. Oh, but this thing in the tabernacle that you think might be an idol, it's not, because it's not made of molten metal. It's made of gold leaf. So
You can construct wood an idol.
presumably not an idol in and of itself, right? I mean, we see this in Isaiah. There's Isaiah makes reference to just how foolish idolatry is by virtue of the fact that the wood is the wood in any case. I cut down a tree, I've got some wood. Some of it I use to heat my house, some of it I use to cook my food, and some of it I turn into a god and I bow down to it. How stupid is that? So, Isaiah is making it very clear that a wooden god is no better than a molten god. But there very well may be an evolving understanding of what constitutes idolatry in the various books and sources in the Bible, and that may be the origin of the golden calf as a story might be a sort of polemic against what was happening in the divided kingdoms. The northern kingdom, Jeroboam builds two golden calves, one at Dan and one at Bethel, this is presumably he didn't think he was being a heretic. He thought he was worshiping God in a way that was fit and proper, and it was a later source that had to come along and say, actually, it's the wrong way. You're doing it the wrong way, and here's why. Later in the story, when the Ark of the Covenant has been destroyed, when the bronze snake Nehushtan has been destroyed, and there's really no sense that we're going to be rebuilding any of those things. This sort of distinction between wooden, metal, molten, and gold leaf, it all disappears. And it just becomes, don't make these images, don't make these idols. But it seems like it's an evolving prohibition. All right, so we'll take a look at verse 5 here. When you sacrifice an offering of well-being to the Lord, sacrifice it so that it may be accepted on your behalf. It shall be eaten on the day you sacrifice it, or on the day following. But what is left by the third day must be consumed by fire. If it should be eaten on the third day, it is an offensive thing. It will not be acceptable, and he who eats it shall bear his guilt. Hey, you. For he has profaned what is sacred to the Lord. That person shall be cut off from his kin. So this is slow down, sweetie, slow down. Oh, I'm sorry. The words of Torah have scared you. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah. So the way they've translated when you sacrifice an offering of well-being to the Lord, it's a perfectly fine translation, but it does sort of imply a like a definiteness. Is that a word? to this action. Whereas vehi is often translated as if. So if you sacrifice an offering of well-being, not when you sacrifice an offering of well-being. And this is a point of debate among scholars. And I just want to introduce you to the debate, to the controversy. Is this saying that this is something that should be done? This is something that is sort of automatic in society, and of course we ought to be offering sacrifices of well-being, and of course we're going to. Maybe it's not even prescriptive, maybe it's just making an assumption about our society. Well, we're definitely going to do that. It's like, oh, when you put traffic lights in your city, you're going to do this. There needs to be the red on the top and the green on the bottom, or whatever it is. And we just sort of assume that it's going to be that way. Whereas there's another reading that says you don't have to do this. there's no sense that you need to be doing this, and life would be perfectly fine if you don't do it. But this instruction is here just in case you decide to, do it. And that tension, it really can't be answered. This is a question that really can't be definitively answered, probably because there are multiple voices in the tradition, multiple voices in the Bible and in the Torah itself on just how necessary these sacrifices were and are. Do we want them to come back? I'm not sure everyone wanted them in the first place. There's a lot of there are a lot of voices in our tradition that say God never wanted these sacrifices. God let you do it because you really wanted to do it, but God didn't care. Other voices say something very different. Other voices say God does really want this, and there's sort of a hint that maybe even God needs it, as we saw this morning in the Rosh Chodesh Torah reading. And it says, Lachmi, my bread, my food. There's a sort of hint that God eats the sacrifices, that God is sustained by the sacrifices. Most of the time, most voices in the tradition, don't lean into that, but it's there, it's present. And so here we have this this notion that when you sacrifice an animal, you should eat it within the first 2 days. That you've got 2 days to eat it, and this is two partial days, by the way. So, or the first day, it doesn't have to count as a full day. If you offer the sacrifice at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when the sun goes down, you've lost your first day, even though it's only a couple of hours. And this is that's a long it's a well-established concept in rabbinic terms. We call it miksada yom kechulo. Part of a day is like a full day. Yeah, Steve.
You just brought up the time. I think it's just go, but I thought there was a certain time of the day you got to perform sacrifice. I'm not saying this, for example, high noon or 7:30 in the morning, but
right.
But not so. Really, how they come up with partial?
So it's a little of both. So there is there's the daily sacrifice in the morning and the daily sacrifice in the afternoon. And there's the Yom Kippur sacrifices in the morning and the afternoon. I mean, there's a lot that has sort of set times. And then there are a lot of more like the free will offerings, the offerings of Thanksgiving and this sort of thing that are more flexible, and or like the Korban Pesach, the Passover, the Paschal Lamb. They would be they'd be doing that all day to get the Paschal Lamb done for every Jewish family that came to Jerusalem. They were slaughtering all day. It was probably the busiest day for the Kohanim to do that, and so you could do that at any hour, but but we see here, if the sacrifice happens, you eat it on the day you sacrifice it, and then you can eat some on the next day. We are going to go home, don't worry. But then you need to throw it out. You need to be done. You need to burn what's left. And there are some questions about why that ought to be. There's some different points of view. Probably the first thing that comes to our mind is don't eat 3-day-old meat in a time before refrigeration. This is, dinosaurs do eat meat, that's true, but even dinosaurs shouldn't eat 3-day-old meat that hasn't been in the fridge. They'll be okay. Maybe they'll be okay, but we shouldn't do it.
One other question.
Yo, please. Yeah.
So we're talking about the Kohanim. So are the Kohanim, because of the sacrifices, are they tamei at that point where they, they're ritually impure, and if so, that way is for when they have to actually eat it, so they become ritually pure.
There are a few sacrifices that make the Kohanim tamei, and there are a few rituals that they do in terms of the burning of the remnants and that sort of thing that can make them tameh. But by and large, they're not tameh. The contact with the blood and all of the gross stuff, it does not render them tameh. That's a great question. You might imagine that it does, because so much of what is tameh is, from our point of view, the icky stuff, right? Certainly if any of us were in a position of doing what the Kohanim were doing day in, day out, we'd probably end the day feeling pretty icky. If you were to try to implement that as a system, every time a Kohen does a sacrifice, they're tameh, it'd be very slow. You need either a lot of Kohanim or you need a lot of time. And so that's it's an interesting point, but no, normally they're not rendered tameh. Probably the most famous instance where they are is in the Para Aduma, the red heifer, where the sacrifice of the red heifer and the burning of it and turning it into ash renders the Kohen tameh, even though the ash itself is what you use to make someone tameh into someone tahor. So it purifies the impure and it impurifies the pure. The Hertz Humash says this is comparable to the congregational rabbinate. I'm not sure what he meant by that exactly, but it's an interesting little maybe joke he snuck in there. I'm not sure. All right, so it could very well be that we shouldn't eat something that's 3 days old for reasons that are evident and obvious to us. That it would just not be healthy, it wouldn't be good for you. But there doesn't seem to be, maybe you say this counts as like a very clear example of a health code aspect to Torah. But a lot of Torah doesn't have any health benefits whatsoever. A lot of the specifics of the mitzvah don't have any health benefits, and so the rabbis are quick to try to find some other explanation for what's going on here, and it may be a way to discourage excessive sacrifice. It could be that because there were ways to safely cure and preserve meat in the ancient world, just like there are today. You could make it into jerky or whatever, but we're told very explicitly don't do that. There seems to be a sense that you couldn't travel very far with this. Just logistically, you couldn't take the sacrifice home with you unless you lived real close to Jerusalem, and so this could be a way to make this more of a distinct thing, where it's not something that you do every day. It's not something that everyone's gonna have the chance to do all the time. You're making it more difficult for people, and you're also potentially, if you're talking about a sheep or a cow, you're making it more of a communal thing also. That if I say to you, we're going to kill your cow, and we all have to, and you have 2 days to eat the meat, that's an absurd amount of meat to eat in 2 days. A cow, you can live on 6 months with a cow, and so it is a way to make these sort of offerings more communal, to make them more of a shared experience. But none of that is said here. What's said here is that it profanes you to eat the 3-day-old meat, that it makes you halal, it makes you profane, and that the person who does it bears the consequence of karet, the being cut off from your people, cut off from God in some way. And it seems like it's especially concerning. All right, we'll take a look at one more set of commandments here, just real quick. We have a few minutes left. We are going to go home real soon, I promise. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not pick your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God. So in the ancient world, when wealth was agricultural, this was a way of distributing some of that wealth to the poorest of the poor, that you are not allowed to completely harvest everything that's in your field. You have to leave a corner of it, and you cannot gather the gleanings. The word in Hebrew is leket, and the leket is when you have a wheat or a barley field, there are usually kernels that will fall off in the harvesting process. And there were people who were so poor and so destitute that they would crawl on the ground and pick up the little kernels of wheat or barley that had fallen off. And what this is saying is that if you own the field, you have to let them do that. You have to let them do that, and you can't do it. Now, probably if you're owning the field yourself, you're not doing it yourself. You would hire people to do the gleaning for you. But the text is very, very clear here. No, don't do that. Don't hire workers to do the gleaning for you. You have to just let the poorest of the poor do the gleaning. That doesn't belong to you. And likewise, the corner of the field has to be left. And the rabbis clarify, or sort of clarify, that there's no percentage here. You can fulfill this mitzvah by leaving 1% of the field on the corner, or 25%, 50%. There's absolutely no number given here. This is an instruction that comes with its own reward, and it is an amount of charitable giving that can't be specified, but just is left to the person and left to their own their own understanding of how much they can afford to give, how much blessing they want to receive for giving. Yeah.
All right, so I'm more fascinated by that because of the Jubilee year, what do? No one's planting, right? The fields are like fallow.
Right,
so,
right.
So I know they have great stuff, but it doesn't say anything in there about you should give 1% great store.
Right.
The work that they have to do, because whatever's on the ground. So how do they feel?
So probably what was happening in the Shemitah years was that a lot of the fields were growing grain naturally. This is the part of the world where wheat comes from originally. You can, if you're in Israel, you can sort of look on the side of the road in the ditches, and you can see emmer wheat growing naturally. And so, especially in a field that had been harvested the previous year, even if you didn't intentionally plant anything, there's still always pieces that are falling off and that's what people were living on during the Shemitah year. But during the Shemitah year, everyone could engage in the gleaning, because even the owner of the field, because the field doesn't belong to him during the Shemitah year. So you just can't plant, right? And you can't stop anyone else from doing it either. You come by and you see some wheat, and then you come back the next day and it's gone. Oh well, you can't call the cops. I mean, no one stole from you in that moment, because it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to whoever comes by and takes it. All right, sweetie. All right. So, okay. So there's so much more to get into in this one. I wish we had more time, but I'm receiving very specific instructions and it is time to go home. So I want to thank you for coming. Yeah. And Chodesh Tov and Shavua Tov.